Yeah, so hey Calvin, I'm Jason, the medical club president here at Northview, and this is our club. Misty is our advisor, Alana and Abigail are cabinet members, and they both have their cameras on. And yeah,
Cool. All right. Yeah.
And
So
can I tag on to that? So Kevin Patel is I want to say counseling tour or tour guide. He spoke to our Avid program, right? And we picked up on
Yeah.
his amazing talent, and we tried to snag him for you guys because we know that he has a lot to contribute. So with that, we'll let him take off.
absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So I don't know if some of you guys may have seen me already. So yeah, like Miss Despinosa mentioned, so I'm a UCLA ambassador. So what that entails is that I'm essentially kind of a bridge between higher education and high school students. So I work a lot with a lot of underrepresented high schools in the greater Los Angeles area, as well as different college fairs, just to kind of promote higher education, not just at UCLA, but in terms of just UCs in general. So that's kind of my job. But during the presentation, I mentioned that I was a pre-med student studying neuroscience, and then so I got snagged, and, and I'm here now, just to talk to you a little bit about pre-med stuff and kind of my journey. But kind of with this, with these type of presentations, I tend to kind of make it more student orientated. So in a sense, like I kind of want to base it off of questions that you guys have, more than kind of just talking about just random stuff, because some things may not be as important as other things, like I think telling you about my not high school, but like my where I grew up and stuff is going to be relevant to like high school experiences, or like certain things. So I'll just give like a brief introduction of who I am and kind of like where I came from, but then afterwards, kind of want to make it more like questioning guided. So if you guys have questions, just keep them in mind right now, or drop them in the chat so that I can look at them and answer them as like the presentation goes on. But yeah, so with that being said, just to introduce myself. So my name is Calvin Patel. I am a current third year at UCLA studying neuroscience and the pre-med path. So kind of what that entails is that the pre-med path in general, I think there's a lot of misconception with it. I think students tend to associate that with a certain type of major, or only STEM students can be pre-med path. But really the whole idea of being pre-med and being on the pre-med path is that it helps orientate you so that you complete the coursework required for med school. It's not a specific major that you apply for. It's kind of like your preference when you go to college, like what do you want to study and like what kind of classes you want to take. So anyone can be in the pre-med path. You can be an English major, you can be art major, you can be a history major, you can be on the pre-med path. What that path is going to do is it's going to allow you to know fully like what classes you need to take in order to go to med school or qualify for admissions requirements. Usually, you tend to take these STEM majors like neuroscience, biology, chemistry, and stuff, just because a lot of those course requirements for the majors are also pre-med requirements, so they overlap, and so it's a lot easier to get all the requirements done. However, it's not impossible. I've known people that have been English majors or philosophy majors and have gone to med school. So keep that in mind though when you are applying, and if you are going forward with that pre-med path isn't exclusive, but it does make your life a lot easier if you are in one of these majors. So with me, I grew up in Imperial Valley, so that's about 4 hours southeast of here. Yeah, you guys are in LA. I'm in San Diego right now, so my orientation's a little off. So I was like, wait, that's 2 hours. No, it's 4 hours away from where you guys are at. So back then, I was also in a medical club. Our medical club was called HOSA. It was a little more, I think it was more of a national club. It was Health Occupation for Students of America. You may have heard of it before, but yeah, in HOSA, I was also the HOSA president for a year. And just through that's kind of where I got most of my experience with pre-med stuff and kind of understand the whole, medical school and medical pathway. But yeah, there wasn't really much I did in terms of pre-med stuff back in high school besides HOSA, and I also volunteered at my local hospital. But that kind of gave me a little bit of a idea of what I wanted to do when I, went to college and stuff. So I knew that pre-med was something I was really interested in. So I decided to kind of go down that path. So, applying, going to college, freshman year, it was really more about learning kind of like what I really wanted to do. So I spent a lot of time in a lot of organizations, not just pre-med organizations. Of course I did my pre-med stuff. I was a neuroscience major. So I, joined the Neuroscience Undergraduate Society. pretty typical. A lot of majors have their own society, so keep that, look out for that if you ever go to college. And then, I also did a bunch of other stuff. I played Ultimate Frisbee, played D1 Ultimate Frisbee. I participated in like dance marathon. And so like I did a lot of, things that I wasn't exclusive to pre-med stuff because, for me, the whole idea was freshman year was like an exploration period where I had like the opportunity to really try and see what it was that I was interested in. So, through freshman year after, going through all these clubs, I knew that I really wanted to do pre-med stuff and I really wanted to go to medical school. So sophomore and now junior year, I kind of really focused my attention on these clubs and orgs and grew in them. So, I, in my neuroscience undergrad society, we co-founded a new department, which was like external communications. So I work there now. We also co-founded a new fraternity, National Honor Society for Neuroscience. So been working with that. I also have a new internship at Cedars-Sinai and also volunteer at Kaiser. So I put in a lot of work towards, pre-med stuff and kind of putting that effort towards wanting to, not just like stand out in an application, but also find my niche. I think one thing that's really missing from a lot of students when they go down the pre-med path is kind of like finding their own, little home in the pre-med org. Because when you're applying to med school, you also have to consider that, med schools have hundreds of thousands of applications. They only accept hundreds of students, right? And, it's really easy for a lot of kids to be like, oh, I'm doing all these pre-med things, so I should get into a med school, right? But when you like sit down and reflect on what all these pre-med things are, it's mostly just signing up and joining an org, right? It's not really standoutish in the sense where it's like you contributed something or you put in effort. And your application sounds like every other application, right? I know right now you guys are in high school and talking about MedClub Lab, but this is something that's going to be really important when you go to college. And it's kind of like we tend to, like I did this too before I learned about it. Was like I just thought that the number of things I did was more important than like the type of things I did. And what I mean by that is that I'm pre-med, but my focus is on systems neuroscience. So what that means is that I focus more on the, association between technology and computer science and neuroscience. So that's my niche. So that's where I've been focusing a lot of my attention and efforts towards, because that helps me stand out in an application, right? Now, if you're reading through like hundreds of applications, right, and then you see, pre-med or pre-med or pre-med, and then you see one kid's like, oh, pre-med, but specifically this, and he did a lot of work with this, right? So those are the type of things that make you stand out. That's the type of things you need to focus on when you get into your second and third year of college, because you don't want to be mixed in with a bunch of the group and just leave it up to chance. And that's not to say that doing pre-med stuff and doing what everyone else does typically, more general stuff, is bad. You should do that. If anything, I encourage you to do that, because that's going to give you the best idea of what you like and what you want to do. And it's just also one thing is like, you don't need to volunteer like 20 different hospitals. I know that kind of sounds a little contradicting because I'm working at 2 different hospitals, but that was on accident. I wasn't planning on that. So, but it's not about doing all these great things at a lot of hospitals. It's about focusing on like one thing that you're really passionate about and growing a lot with it. I don't know if you guys have heard like being published for research before, but a lot of professors, or pretty much every professor at UCLA, and then all the doctors at hospitals with the PhDs, they all do research and they all do publications. What that means is that they'll research something and they'll publish an article or some research paper in some form or way in like some scientific journal or article. But the thing is, like, if you're an undergraduate student working with them, you can get published in the research paper as well. So, for example, let's say I was a med school applicant reader, and the reason I know all this stuff is because I've talked to a lot of applicant readers from med school, David Geffen Med School, Kirk. I've had conversation with them, and this is the type of things they look at. And so, for example, like he mentioned that, if he sees a student with like 20 different clubs and orgs, but then he sees like a student with like 2 different orgs, but like 1 published paper, they would rather take that student, because it shows that they stuck with one thing and they dedicated themselves to the point where they're now like recognized from anyone. Right. So it's things like that we tend to overlook because we get so caught up in the competition of things that, we're just trying to be the first and we're trying to do everything. And, it's going to feel like that going to college. It gets overwhelming at times because, being pre-med isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. Everyone at UCLA, the majority of students are pre-med. It's just kind of the nature of, the school being STEM and really well renowned for research and such. But that's just kind of been the story of, my journey so far, being pre-med, and kind of, right now, third year, I'm taking a gap year off. So I won't be applying until next year. And also one thing about gap years, I know you may have heard a lot of things about taking a gap year, or you may have not heard about things taking a gap year. Gap year is not bad. If anything, it's actually better to take a gap year, because what you can do in your gap year is that you can take that time to show how dedicated you are to the med school pathway, that you're going out of your own way to find internships, to find research opportunities that aren't directly involved with the school. So that kind of shows your own level of growth, that you're so dedicated that you don't need like a school or a foundation to like guide you. You can do it yourself because you want to. And also, taking that year off gives you time to relax too. It's really easy to get burned out going 8 years of straight, hell when it comes to school. It's just really hard. Taking that year off, not just to relax, but also do a lot of things, can really help. Especially studying for the MCAT as well. You have more time to study and practice for the MCAT, take more exams. I honestly would recommend a gap year. However, I don't want to sway you into taking one if you don't need to, right? Some students are just, they just don't need it. And if anything, they want to be in school more than not be in school. And that's completely okay too. One of my friends is going straight to med school. He's already doing his application process right now. So it's completely okay not to take a gap year as well. I actually came to the decision of taking a gap year just 2 months ago. So, decisions change, as time goes on. I wasn't going to take one until, February. So, just that's kind of been like my story so far with pre-med, but I kind of want to leave it open to questions, see if you guys have any questions or things you want me to talk a little bit more about. Because I know I kind of went on a little bit.
Yeah, I actually have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I've looked, because I'm like looking at colleges and their programs, and I know UCLA doesn't call it pre-med, they say pre-health.
Right.
Or at least that's what they have it under. And they do explain that you don't need to be a specific major, that you can do anything as long as you do the prerequisites and all that. Mm-hmm. But while you are under the pre-health program, are you given advisors or people who tell you like what you're supposed to be doing? Or is it more like you have to manage your own schedule and what you need to do?
Right. Yeah. So when it comes to advising and stuff, there isn't a specific advisor for pre-med or pre-health pathways. For me, I personally use my department counselors for my neuroscience department, and they were the ones that helped me, navigate through the pre-med path. So you usually be more reliant on, those counselors specific for your major or department, and also the pre-med organizations, because they're going to be full of students that are in the same pathway and have knowledge from students from years ago that have done the same thing, right? So they understand the pre-med path inside and out. So a lot of your information, like understanding, is going to come from those orgs and also your counselors from that department.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was a good question.
Calvin, do you find that in being pre-med is within the student population, it's very competitive, or do you find that students are more supportive of each other and are really advocating for you to get through like they want to get through?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no right answer for that, because every college is going to have, your combination of really competitive students and like really supportive students, right? And that's kind of been my experience so far at UCLA. I've had my fair share of, being in classrooms full of students that are just, like all for themselves type of things. But then at the same time, I've had a lot of students that have been like, let's get this done together. So, it's just about finding that group, really. And it's really not hard to, the majority of students aren't really going to be that cutthroat. They understand, they know that pre-med isn't the easiest, and, they all want to get through together. But, it's not to say you're not going to run into students that are going to be, very competitive. That's always going to be the case. You're always going to have students that are just, really competitive, straight to the point. But, it's not going to be to the point where it's going to affect your level of understanding education, because you're going to have a lot of students that are going to be just as supportive and, understanding of the fact that, pre-med is hard and sucks. And, I think what I've learned is a lot of the older students are more supportive of the younger ones. Coming in as a freshman, I think I learned more from like juniors and seniors than I did from my own freshman class, right? And so you're gonna get a lot of that vibe when you go to school like UCLA. It's just gonna be more of like the older helping the younger. And that's where you're gonna get a lot of advice from these pre-med clubs too. You know, everyone there in the pre-med clubs are gonna be supportive. You're not gonna have that competition spirit. But, you know, keep in mind that competition is really everywhere, you know. There's not gonna be a school where it's gonna be perfectly supportive of like every student. Competition is just the nature of things, right? But yeah, I wouldn't say that it's been to the point where it's been like negatively affecting me. If anything, like I don't think I've like really dealt with that much personally, if at all. But I know of friends that I've had friends that have been competitive or kind of cutthroat. But you know, honestly speaking, I don't think it's something that it's going to be, you know, something that's going to affect you personally because it's just not really what the general population is like.
So you said you're pre-med, but you have a focus on neurology and all that kind of thing. So what exactly is it that you want to do? Do you plan on going to med school and pursuing a doctorate, or do you want to do something different?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, my plan is going to med school, getting my MD, and hopefully going into some neurology or neurosurgery type of career. But you know, things change as time goes. I don't know yet for sure because at the same time, you know, I was looking at the requirements for being a neurosurgeon, and that just takes years upon years, and things like I don't, you know, like then you got to decide like how much time do I really want to sacrifice towards this? Like, is it really worth it? And you know, I do like neuroscience a lot, but you know, it doesn't mean that that's going to be my future, you know, entirely, right? Yeah, my time in undergrad is really my time to explore something I'm really passionate about. But you know, my time in med school and during rotations and stuff is really when I'm going to figure out like what exactly I want to do. So hopefully, you know, I find something that's a little less demanding that I actually enjoy too. But you know, maybe anesthesia, who knows? It's a little less headache, but just as hard. But you know, not 7 years of residency or whatever. But yeah, I don't know if some of you guys know, but like for med school, it's not just 4 years and you're a doctor. Yeah, after your 4 years in med school, you have your internship year, and then you have your residency years, and then after your residency years, depending on what you're, you know, specializing in, you have the specialty years. After your specialty years, then you're an actual doctor. It's like the full paid doctor. So it takes a lot more than just 4 years med school. It's more like 7, 8 years post undergrad. So keep that in mind if the, you know, med school is something that you're interested in. It's gonna be quite a journey. It's gonna take some time.
Do you mind talking a little bit about the medical application process, like MCATs, and how much your MCAT score would weigh over like extracurriculars or yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So MCAT, yeah, probably one of the most, you know, decisive tests you're probably ever going to take if you are pre-med. Probably one of the most important ones too. You know, the MCAT fairly range. It's a weird scoring range, like 472 to 528. Weird numbers, don't know why, but 528 is a perfect score. In terms of weighing it against other things, each school or each med school has their own like minimum requirement for an MCAT. You know, for example, like David Geffen has the UCLA med school has a requirement of 514 to even apply. So depending on what school you know apply to and look into, like some schools have like a 508, 502. It's usually 500 plus is pretty typical of med school. You know, that's pretty average if, you know, for an MCAT score. Anything above 520 is considered like really good. That's like 90th percentile plus. You know, if you're getting like a 525, you're going, you know, that's pretty insane. But one thing I learned that one specific med school does is they do a point system. Right. So this differs for every med school. I can't speak on behalf of every med school. I just know one of the med schools does. I forgot which one it was. I was just reading about it. But they do what's called the point system. So for example, if your GPA falls between like a 3.8 and a 4.0, you get 5 points. And then if your GPA falls between like 3.6, 3.8, you get like 4 points. So like stuff like that. So that's one of the ways like they rank it. And then your MCAT scores rank the same way. They'll have like, if it's 525 and above, you get 5 points. If it's 522 to 525, it's like 4 points. And then depending on your scoring, you know, the highest scores get like interviews and stuff. And so, yeah, the process for applying to med school is quite lengthy. You'll start Usually, if you're not going to take a gap year, you would start by the end of your junior year. So you start sometime in April or May, and that's when you submit your primary application by June. June is when your submissions open up. That's when you can start submitting it. And then after you submit your primary applications, you may or may not get a secondary application, depending if they want to learn more about you or if you've progressed more in the application process. If you get a secondary application, it's usually a good sign. Then you got to submit another application. And after that, there's interviews. Depending on the med school, you'll have 1 to 2 interviews. Usually one's pretty typical. And then that's when you'll, if this was in person, you'd go in person and interview with them. Or if they have representatives down in your state, you can always go there. And then after your interview, then you'll get a decision based off of if you got accepted or not. And so that whole process takes about like 6 months. So you'll be, starting to apply like March, April. You won't get your decision till like the end of the year. So it's a pretty long process. That's why you have to start your junior year, not your senior year, because it's going to take up pretty much half the year just to apply. It's really daunting too, because I don't know if you guys have heard of like the personal statement. If you've ever heard mention of that. Yeah. So it's like one of the most vague essays you'll ever write. It's literally just says personal statement, right? And then it gives you like key pointers like what you can talk about, but the whole point is like it gives you nothing. And so you kind of have to create your own question you want to answer and create your own essay. And it's really hard because you only have about a page worth of writing that you have to fill in basically your whole life and like why medicine. That's the biggest question basically, is why medicine. And it's really easy to go off of tangents and not give them the answers they want, because they really want specific answers, but they won't tell you that. So you really have to like look into like what it is that med schools want as an answer for a person to be like, what do they want to see? And you don't, it's like you have to tell a story, but you don't have the space to tell a real story. So you gotta like tell like a summation of a story that encompasses everything, but also encompasses what you've done as a pre-med student, but also like why medicine. And so it gets really, really stressful. But it is probably one of the biggest essays you'll also write. Yeah, the whole pre-med thing is just some of the biggest things you'll ever do in undergrad. MCAT, personal statement, the whole application process. But like once you get to med school, things are a little more smooth sailing, because you're not really competing against people. You're kind of just taking tests to pass them at that point. So it's like, I just need to pass just to, get this done and get, eventually get to a residency program, like step 1, step 2, that's like the test names. But yeah, the most of your, studying time and stress is going to come from your undergrad years, taking them kind of writing your personal statements.
I have a nephew who is in his 3rd year of residency. So he went to school in Denver, and then I do remember clearly, well, of course, when he graduated, and then he had interviews for residency. Well, I know one was in Florida and then Albuquerque, and he ended up going to Albuquerque. So with that information, when you're applying to medical schools, how do you choose which one you want to go to? And do you decide to go in your state, out of state? Obviously, you had to pay for the flight to get there and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. So, with like medical schools and stuff, there's a lot of, factors that go into play. Like Ms. Espinosa mentioned right now, like it's flights to go to interviews. It's, the cost of attending out of state. It's, the cost of travel just to, meet with them, just to visit campus. So there's a lot of additional costs that aren't, mentioned, because of course, the application itself is also $300 per application. You also have to consider that. So it's expensive just to even apply to medical schools. So you have to be very selective when you want to apply. You can't just apply to like 50 different schools, right? And so, the way I personally, I would like to stay in state, just because it makes it easier for me to, if I do get interviews, to go into these interviews. And also, California in general is just a nice place. It has a lot of good medical schools as well. For example, the UCSF med school, David Geffen, Keck, UCR's med school. So a lot of these med schools are already like top 10 in the nation. So it's really, it'd just be ideal just to stay in California. But traveling isn't the worst thing. Like I don't mind going out of state, so I will keep my options open. I know that, NYU has been like an option, Cornell, Johns Hopkins. So schools like that I've definitely considered as well. It's just, cost of attendance. Like, do I really want to live in, New York? I mean, it's fun. It sounds good in theory, but I really don't. So wouldn't really be stoked to go there. But if I have to go there, I will go there. So, just things like that. Also, you want to consider, family and stuff, right? Med school is definitely going to be a time where you're going to focus a lot on like education and study. but at the same time, once you become a doctor, once you find your own job, seeing family and stuff isn't going to be as easy as it would if you're going to school. So, if staying close to home is something like, that's really important to you, definitely consider schools like in the LA area, like CAC or Geffen. It's a lot easier said than done since they accept 200 students a year. So, and I'm just speaking like it's going to happen, but there's a lot of factors that go, and also cost, right? You also consider living. You're not going to be living in dorms. There's no dorms when it goes to med school. It's about apartments and stuff. So you got to consider the cost of apartments in the neighborhood that you're living in, right? For example, LA in general is just more expensive, no matter where you go. But then if I go to Riverside or Irvine, right, I'm not going to be paying as much. So, just different factors you got to weigh in, and you really got to consider, what type of med school are they? What kind of stuff do they focus on? What are they good at? What are they, do they do a lot of this? Do they, do a lot of research-based med school? Are they more clinical? When do you start your clinical rotations? That's also one big thing, right? When am I going to be able to see patients in a hospital? And if you're not going to see them till your 4th year of med school, it's not worth it to go to that med school. I'm going to be completely honest with you. If you're going to see them 2nd, 3rd year, then that's a med school you should consider, because you're going to get that, hands-on patient experience that you're really not going to get from other med schools. So a lot of factors go into play. I think when you start getting into that whole med school aspect, which will be probably 3-4 years down the line for you guys, just start making lists. If you hear about a med school that one of your friends talk about, list it down. Basically have a Google sheet or something, list all the med schools you're interested in, have factors you weigh it based off of, right? So have the Google sheet, have the names, and be cost, when do I start my rotations, where is it located, what's the cost of rent, what's the minimum requirements and stuff. So I can give you a better idea of what type of school you want to go to, so you don't scramble around by the time the applications start up. And also one more thing when it comes to personal statements, just the application opens up March, April-ish, but it doesn't mean you have to start your personal statement then. A lot of students start their personal statements a year before they even apply, just because everything they do is going to be important for their personal statement. So when they start writing these ideas down, they start forming the statement in their head. And then when it comes time to writing it, you have all the things outlined already, and you know where to put your thoughts. Because if you start doing it, just out of nowhere, you're not going to be in the right mindset to write a personal statement. You're not going to know exactly what was important to you, what wasn't important to you. It's hard to reflect back on certain moments and experience what you experienced unless you already have it written down. So, things like that. Just small things like that will really make your life a lot easier, being pre-med and stuff. Something. Have I thought about? Actually, yeah, I have. I was actually thinking about going through the Navy program. I heard they paid for med school, but then I realized I don't want to be in the Navy. So it was a toss-up, it was what do I want to do? But, the military has a lot of good programs for pre-med students that go to medical school. They'll pay for it under certain programs if you get accepted. And then they'll also, you just have to give them back some time, serve for a certain amount of years. But, if that is something you're interested in, if you're interested in, the military to begin with, and, now you want to be a doctor, that's just something that could, really work out. And the Navy has a really good program. Definitely look into that if that is something you're interested in.
You mentioned doing, because you said you took a gap year. So you mentioned doing research and how you've been at 2 different hospitals. So I have 2 questions. When it comes to doing research, how do you approach that? Do you ask a professor? Is there ways that you can join an organization or club that does the research, or is it something you have to do on your own? And then what kinds of things are you doing at this hospital that help you gain experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So research, the thing about research is everyone wants to do research, right? And so, you may think that it's just really hard to get research opportunities because you're there's thousands of students going for research positions, but it's really not hard. So there's a bunch of ways you can find research. Like you mentioned, reaching out, right? So pretty much every professor in, these science courses is going to be doing research, right? A lot of times these professors' main purpose was to do research, but they have to be a professor on the side in order to keep the research position. So keep in mind that some of these professors have their main focus being in research. One thing you can do is that you can directly ask professors, right? If you have a good connection with a professor, you go to like office hours stuff, which is like their one-on-one time, not one-on-one time, but like out of classroom time. They can talk with them, get to know them better. And if you learn about their research that is something you're interested in, you can always, ask them directly, like, hey, I heard you're doing this research. I was wondering if there's any openings or stuff. Like I was interested in, being one of the volunteers, or not a research assistant, right? Another thing you can do is that for different departments, they'll list all the research they're doing and the professors that are doing research. So for a neuroscience department, they have all the list of the neuroscience professors and the type of research they're doing as well. So that's where I found my first research opportunity. I just read upon the researches, saw which ones I was interested in, and I emailed the professor directly. And then, one of them got back to me and was like, yeah, sure. Another one, a lot of pre-med clubs have research fairs or lab fairs. And in these lab fairs, they'll have research, not research, but like PIs, the investigators for the research come and present their research in hopes that students join because they need more students, right? So you'll have, labs seeking out students as well. So you always want to keep that in mind. I know my neuroscience society does lab fairs every quarter. So we'll have, some labs that need students or want students come in and present their research. And then through there, you can kind of sign up. That's where I found another one of my research opportunities. So, there's a lot of opportunities to find research. It's really not as scary as you may think, because a lot of times labs are looking for students. They just, some students just don't realize it. And then for your second question, you asked about what type of research I do. So for my research, at first I was in 2 different labs prior to my one in Cedars-Sinai. So my first lab, I worked with rats, and we worked on virtual reality versus reality. So what we did was focused on kind of like understanding what goes on in our brain, in a virtual reality versus like real life, right? Like how do we process stuff? Like how do we process time? How do we process space? Because it's all different. Depth is different. Our cognition of what's going on is different. So we study a lot of that. I helped design the machines that basically were surgically implanted in the brains of rats, and then we measured their activities and stuff. So that was my first research. My second lab that I'm currently in, the other one I left just prior, just because I had too much going on. I just don't want to divert my focus. And so the one I'm in right now still is the Neural Reconstruction Lab. So what we do is we are currently just working on neurodegenerative diseases. We're kind of trying to understand like what happens to neurons, and like why do certain diseases occur. And so what I do is I work on the morphology team. So my job is basically to isolate certain neurons. So I basically find individual neurons. And in these individual neurons, I basically work to reconstruct them using software. And through these reconstructions, we then, implant it back to the main image, and we kind of work on seeing like the connections between different neurons, like what kind of connections are going, like what's actually occurring, and like, kind of the communication between the brain, basically. And then what I do at Cedars-Sinai, this was a paid internship, so it's a little more official. It took a little bit more time because I had to, personally talk to Cedar and like find job opportunities through there. And then through that one, what I'm doing, I haven't started yet. This is my summer internship, so I will be starting soon. But I'll also be working with kind of like systems and neuroscience. So my job is basically just study like learning and memory, and kind of like understanding it through a self-learning algorithm. So what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna work on designing basically an algorithm that like learns by itself in terms of like understanding behavior, understanding learning, and like kind of like predicting behavior and predicting motives. So it's a little bit more on that like technological side. Which is, kind of my niche now, right? I wasn't expecting that to be my niche. I didn't really understand computer science, nor did I really want to know more about it, but I kind of accidentally fell into this hole. And then afterwards I was like, wait, everything I'm doing now kind of like ties into this, like might as well, make this something that's my med school lab. And then, so I'm also like a learning assistant. So I basically help teach coding classes as well, just to kind of boost it up a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of my focus for research and, learning. That's kind of just what I do. I don't know if you guys have time, but if it's time for one more question, I can answer this last one, because your class ends at 1:06, right? Or lunch. Okay, I don't want to take up too much time. I'll just answer this last question. So with all this time in school studying at med school, how do you afford all this? Do you work, or will you have to work well? So yeah, great question. So the way I pay for majority of my college and stuff is through FAFSA, right? So financial aid is something that I think every student should apply for, whether you think you qualify or not, because more often than not, you will qualify for some form of financial aid or the Cal Grant. You know, this is basically free money the government's giving you, right? You just have to submit some of your tax returns from your parents, and usually it's not even that much work because it's already filed, and so all you have to do is just recall it through like the IRS system. It takes about 5 minutes, and then the application itself takes about like another 5 or 10 minutes, and you're pretty much done. You submit your FAFSA. It's super easy, super simple, and it's like, you know, you can basically pay for your entire college through that. And also UCLA has certain programs, which is a blue and gold scholarship, that, you know, if your family's income falls under a certain category, you can get your entire tuition paid for. So it's a lot of these opportunities that, you know, colleges have, like especially like UCLA, that help pay for, you know, tuition expenses. And so, you know, just through that and stuff, it's helped, you know, tremendously when it comes to, you know, just paying through college and going through college. But also, yes, so my job, when I present it to you guys, is my job. Being a UCL ambassador is a paid position. So I get paid through undergraduate admissions. And then also my internship at Cedars-Sinai is going to be a paid position. So I do have jobs here and there, kind of just help with finances, because of course, you know, if you want to have fun time or free time, you can't just use your FAFSA money for that. You know, you got to work for it too. So, you know, I do work, but I don't think I've had to worry too much about finances because, you know, UCLA's financial aid office has helped me a lot. FAFSA has helped me a lot. So, you know, definitely take advantage of that. And if you do want to learn more about it, you can always contact the UCLA financial aid office. You know, they'll be more than happy to give you like whatever information you need in terms of financial aid or even FAFSA and like, you know, Cal Grant stuff. You know, they're there to give you money. So, you know, don't hesitate to reach out. Even if you're not a student, you don't have to be a UCLA student to reach out. You can just call them and be like, hey, I'm potentially interested in UCLA. I just want to learn more about financial aid opportunities and kind of like the scholarships you guys offer. And boom, you can learn more about that. And you can contact different schools and learn more about that through there too.
I think our time's up, guys, and I know that Kelvin has a pretty heavy schedule as well. Can you guys unmute or type, whatever you choose, and say thank you so much for gracing us with your presence and all of the knowledge that you dropped on us. It was amazing.
No,
Thank
Thank you so much, Calvin.
Thank you. Really helpful. Thank you.
no, of course, absolutely. I mean, I've been through it, but if I can make it easier for you guys to go through it, then, you know, done my job. But yeah, I mean, you know, if there are any other questions and stuff, I think Miss Espinosa has my phone number. She can give it to you guys if you have any direct questions, or you can route it through her. And, you know, I'm always available if you guys ever want to meet again sometime soon. Feel free to let me know, and I'll definitely, you know, check through with my schedule to see when I'm available, and then, you know, if we can also have another presentation focused on different stuff too, if you guys want, you know, specific talking about certain topics I mentioned.
That's awesome. Thank you. And of course, we wish you the best in your gap year, whatever you do and beyond.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.